100 ABC Women would like to thank BIPOC Executive Search for sponsoring today's episode.
The BIPOC Executive Search app is here for you. Get information about job opportunities we're recruiting for. Keep up to date and in the know about career news tailored to Indigenous, Black, and other racialized audiences. Gain helpful tips and learnings to help you on your career trajectory, celebrate job appointments, and more. The BIPOC Executive Search app, here to elevate the candidate experience for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Free to download and available on iPhone and Android smartphones.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman,
100 ABC Women would like to take this opportunity to welcome our viewers and listening audience, families, friends, and our sponsors to our inspirational conversations, Fireside Chats with 100 ABC honorees. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold initiative created by the co-authors, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, a former MP, Donna Jones-Simmons, a corporate diversity executive, and Dr. Denise O'Neill-Green, Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion at Ryerson University. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as a website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. We are pleased to bring you a series of fireside chats which include conversations around education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, legal, technology, entrepreneurship, diversity and equity, media, engineering, politics, sports, and so much more. These, we know, are topics that matter to us and to you. These educational and inspirational conversations will be made available to all current and future generations via our 100 ABC YouTube channel. This is a great way to learn from our elders, brilliant-minded and accomplished Black Canadian women. Today's episode is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This is moderated by Nancy Sims, who is the Director of the Center for Human Rights, Equity, and Diversity. Over to you, Nancy.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. It's a great day to be alive and well. Thank you for the introduction. While this panel focuses on race and racism, I hasten at the outset to tell you that the term race is a social construct. A social construct is a social and political determined label. There is no biological validity in the term race. That being said, the realities of our lives is often determined by this construct. So while race is a myth, racism is real. You're in for an exciting 30 minutes. These two women, Tyjondah and Njeri, are impactful and wonderful, and they offer what we all need to advance our race talk and our EDI practice. Time is limited, so let me introduce them. Tyjondah Kerr. While completing her psychology degree at the University of Windsor, Tyjondah started her career in gaming in 1994 with Casino Windsor. She started working for OLG in 1999 and has held management positions at OLG slots at Mohawk Racetrack and OLG slots at Woodbine Racetrack. During her 20 plus years with OLG, Tyjondah has had progressive leadership roles. She's currently the Director, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion within People and Culture. Tyjondah is accountable for the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion strategy for the organization and helps to create a sense of belonging for OLG employees. Welcome, Tyjondah.
Thank you.
Next, I invite and will quickly give a short bio on Njeri Damali Sojourner-Campbell. Njeri Damali Sojourner-Campbell is an employment lawyer and human rights. It's an employment, labor, and human rights lawyer at X Morley, Toronto office. Njeri provides strategic advice and representation before administrative tribunals and courts. She also assists clients to execute workplace investigations and provides training seminars on a range of labor and human rights topics. A believer in the importance of mentorship and career sponsorship, Njeri regularly sets aside some time to mentor pre-law and law students. She's an emerging thought leader in equity and education. Outside of work, she enjoys reading, journaling, and working on her family tree. Thank you. Now, it's just about impossible to start any talk on race without acknowledging the land that we sit on. And so I just want to briefly acknowledge, and I invite you all to think about whose land are you sitting on? And how might you continue to support the Indigenous group for whose land you sit on? And it doesn't matter where you're coming in from, anywhere in the world. Whose land do you sit on? So I'm grateful and I give thanks and praise to the first inhabitants of this land, Canada. Without much ado, I want to tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about race at work. And Tyjondah is going to do a quick presentation and followed by Njeri. And she's going to address, is equity, diversity, and inclusion the answer? Following that, I will do some key learnings and a quick thank you. Over to you, Tyjondah.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you again for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, ABC, 100 ABC Women, for this opportunity. So when we want to answer the question, how do we talk about race at work? We first have to understand why we talk about race at work. And I think the best way to start is that we have to acknowledge the history of racism in Canada and around the world, frankly. And, we have to understand that because of our collective, race-based trauma, that understanding of what each other goes through, that we bring those fears and anxieties to work. And when we're in the workplace, obviously our business priorities are about, that ROI, that bottom line. And so who's going to make that happen? Our employees are going to make that happen. And if our employees are going to make that happen, we need to ensure that they are in a safe work environment. They have a sense of belonging, they have a sense of value, and they're engaged at doing their work to complete those business priorities. So you've got to address those fear and anxieties. And you have to understand that, for example, when we see George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and we hear about their deaths and the way they've, been murdered, that affects us as people of color, and we bring that to work. So, you want to talk about why we're addressing racism at work. It's because people show up and you tell us to show up as our authentic selves. And because of that, we're showing up with those fears, those anxieties, we also bring our positive selves to work. But there are times when, the things that affect our race brings us to that realization that we can't perform at work because these things are affecting us and are in our minds. So, we need to understand that that's why we talk about race at work. And then, when we talk about ensuring that our employees are safe, you got to make sure that when you tell us to be our authentic selves, we want to come to work as who we are. We want to come to work with our locks, our twists, our afros. But then there's this historical, white superiority that professionalism is straight hair or, your hair back in a bun. And I know I struggled with that in my career. For example, anytime I had any big meetings or speaking engagements, I'd either pull my hair back in one or I'd go to the hairdresser and have it blowed out straight because I thought that was the image of professionalism. So you have to understand that people aren't actually showing up as their true authentic selves to work. And so you need to get to know people and understand them and create those safe spaces. So this is why we talk about race at work. So now that we know the why, let's talk about how we do it. It's really important to know how you do this. So I coined this term curious empathy, and I love it because it's about being curious, but with also trying to understand where people are coming from, trying to understand their lived experience, how they're feeling, and so I generate this concept, the concept that I push at work, because I want you to be curious, but I also want you to understand where people are coming from, why they're coming to work feeling the way they do, and why you may not understand because you don't walk in their shoes. So I like to start off by introducing that concept of curious empathy. And so one of the first things you want to do, I have 4 things I'm going to talk about. And you want to talk about, your own individuality. We want to talk about education. We want to talk about allyship. And then we want to talk about growth in this journey. So one of the first things that I tell anybody before you address race at work is you want to get really comfortable with yourself and your dimensions of diversity. And so I always bring up your emotional intelligence, right? Like you obviously have the skill set when you're at work, so you're brilliant and you have a high IQ. But do you have that emotional IQ? What's your emotional quotient? And so I like to think about, when you're working on your self-awareness, you got to understand that you have to figure out ways to relieve stress when you're going to talk about conversations about race, because it's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to feel comfort at all because you're learning new and different things, and it's going to make you feel a little, a little bit wary about where the conversation is going because you get defensive. So your emotional intelligence is going to help you relieve that stress and figure out how the way you navigate the conversations, understand what people are feeling. And you're going to do that in a couple different ways, right? You're going to talk about self-management, how you work on your emotions. You're going to figure out your self-awareness. You're going to you should understand a little bit more about yourself and your dimensions of diversity and how you show up at work. And then how to navigate the waters with others, right? And how others are going to react to you, how you react to them. That it's really good to understand and have that self-awareness of others and yourself. And then, of course, the social awareness, right? When you're in groups, like, where your empathy takes you, understanding emotions and needs and concerns of other people. That's really big when you're talking about that self-education, self-awareness, empathy. All of this matters. And then you want to manage your relationships. Relationship management is super, super important, especially at work, because you're not working by yourself. No company that works in silos is successful. So you have to collaborate and you have to work together. So I always say the very first thing when you're talking about race at work is to understand the individual, understand how that individual reacts to others, and how you want to progress relationships at work. So self-awareness, key, and individualism, understanding, your person. And then I like to talk about education, right? You gotta really understand cultural difference. You gotta get culturally intelligent. And this is why curious empathy comes in again, right? Understanding how people's lived experiences affect the workplace, and learn to engage and manage in that by asking those questions, by being curious. So you gotta educate yourself. Can you empathize with another person's lived experience and narrative? I would suggest considering learning and acknowledging the pain to gain those strides in future education and making things better, right? And I think education is a very, very key component when you want to talk about race at work. And, I always read, when I read the little articles, et cetera, people always say, don't go to that one Black person or that one Asian person to find out how they're feeling. But I know I work in this space. This is what my organization is leading me to do, is to educate them. And so I always say, come and talk to me. I'm the Black girl to talk to, because I'll help you out, right? Because I have the resources to lead you to. But then education is broad. I mean, look at us today in this virtual world. You can find anything on the internet. So do some education. Go and find out the historical concepts, that, as Nancy said, about that race is a cohort, is a social cohort. Like, figure that out. Go and do your homework, and understand that it's something that was developed. It's not who I am. It doesn't define, race doesn't all of a sudden become this problematic thing in this uncomfortable space to talk. So I say go and do some education in this space when you're ready to start the conversations, and know that it's not always going to be pretty. You're not always going to get closure when you're having a conversation, but educate yourself and understand the different dimensions of diversity. And then when you understand all that, right? When you figure out who you are, and then you understand the historical concept, and you understand why people show up to work the way they are, and you understand what people bringing them true selves to work means, then you want to figure out, do I want to be an ally? And yes, you should be an ally, but you want to honestly go into that, understanding that allyship is important when you want to advance discussions on race, and when you want to ensure equity and equality in your workplace. So what is it about allyship? Understand that allyship is actions. It's a verb. It's not all about positive intentions. It's about actually picking up and doing. Are you recognizing that, Tyjondah sitting in an office is constantly being interrupted, or no one's asking her opinion? As an ally, are you helping me raise my voice? Are you saying, wait, I want to hear from Tyjondah? This is what allyship does, and this is what's going to advance that equity, ensure that people are given their time, their voice, and to add and contribute at work. I know how easy it is to go to the people that are just like us, but it's diversity of thought is a very important tool when you're progressing in the workplace. And so having different opinions from different people of color, even different aspects of diversity, will help you get better. So be that ally, be that person who gives that person a space and a platform and a voice. And I know for myself, I even recognize my privilege, and in my workplace, my power and privilege, being a director at OLG, what I can do to help my other friends of color in my workplace. So even as a person of color, I can be an ally as well. And I always like to say that's very important. It's not just our white colleagues that can be allies. We can all be allies in all different areas of diversity. So figure out how to become an ally, how you can support people and understand them better, and get to know them better so that you can be an ally, figuring out what they want in the workplace. And then lastly, I want to talk about growth, because we always think that there's a problem, we have these systemic barriers, we need to fix it. What is our policies? What are our programmings? What are we doing? But I think I always like to tell people you need to be patient. I mean, from my point of view anyways, it takes a really long time to change culture. It takes a really long time to change people, because it's a learned behavior of practicing, eliminating bias, recognizing that, wait, I'm only thinking in one way. How do I be open-minded, etc. So I like to remind people that this is a journey. This takes time. You need to be patient. There is so much to learn in this space, because when you figure out race and you help this marginalized community, then you have your LGBTQ2S plus community. You have your community who suffers from disabilities and have neurodisabilities. There is so many things in the EDI space that you have to focus on. So give yourself time and patience to keep at it, learn from it. And when you get that comfort, the growing then starts, right? We learn in our discomfort. And I like to always say that we are going to make mistakes. We are human beings. I am not perfect. So you need to be able to forgive human beings, forgive each other. When they say you're sorry,
thank you, Tyjondah. Thank you. I wonder if you could just say 3 last final words as we need to move to the next panelist. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Nancy. I would basically say that, get to know yourself. Get to know yourself, where you want to be, where you want to go. How do you want to treat others in this world? Because we have to do it together. It is an accountability of all of us to move this conversation forward and to create a community where people feel comfortable and a place to be themselves. So I would say get to know yourself better, have courage, and move on. Do it. We rise together. Right, Nancy?
Absolutely. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is messy work, and it's lengthy work, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of space. And so it's my absolute pleasure to pass the mic on to Njeri, who is going to help us unpack all this. And people need to really understand that people come at EDI from different lenses and from different places. None of us as equity practitioners or human rights practitioners are the same. Over to you, Njeri. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to talk with you. So in my practice, I often have to answer the question, is equity, diversity, and inclusion the answer to racism? And some might be surprised by my answer. My answer is usually it's not. And here's why. And part of this comes from my experience in working with a number of different organizations that have EDI programs, and actually it's more of a commentary on some of the patterns that I've seen in how EDI work or DEI work, or whatever the acronym happens to be, is currently being done. So I'm going to talk about some of my critiques. The first is that oftentimes EDI work is actually that, it's EDI. There isn't really an appreciation for the difference between equity, diversity, and inclusion as concepts that are very different, have very different goals, and that interact with each other differently. They tend to get lumped together, and when that happens, they tend to get watered down to some of the more comfortable means of dealing with this work, which often tends to be a focus on things like respect, courtesy, being kind to each other, understanding each other, asking questions of each other, and so on. And I think that all of that is important. The challenge, though, is racism can live among and beside and in those spaces between EDI. It is possible to have a strong EDI process and to also have racism operating. And as an illustration of that, think about the classic multicultural event, or any kind of diversity or inclusion event, where we might be wearing a particular color to honor a particular group, or we might be hosting performances to increase our knowledge of a particular community or understanding of a particular history. Unless you have an individual who understands and appreciates how racism white privilege, white supremacy can operate in a space like that, it is possible that even in an attempt to increase knowledge, that comments can be made, assumptions can be supported, stereotypes can be promulgated and not properly addressed. And I think one of the reasons why that happens is because, for the most part, EDI strategies are designed to encourage people to feel safe and to feel positive things about whether it's the workplace or the environment. And all of those things are good. The problem is anti-racism and discussions about anti-racism usually don't feel good. They're usually, when they're done right, they're usually challenging. They can create feelings of defensiveness, shame, fear, frustration. And so when you've got a whole context that's oriented towards feeling good and comfortable and engaged, it can seem counterintuitive to talk about things that cause people to feel bad or negative or like they've done something wrong. And so, of course, as humans, we move towards pleasure and away from pain. And so over time, without someone making sure that anti-racism is the touchstone of an EDI strategy, these strategies can evolve into something that can be very surface and performative. And that's EDI at its worst. I think EDI at its best focuses on structural issues, structural, systemic, institutionalized issues, and it is intersectional. So in order to properly, in my view, deal with race or racism in the workplace, we actually need to use the term race and use the term racism and invoke its opposite, which is anti-racism. Anti-racism is inherently designed to identify, dismantle, and prevent all expressions of racism from existing in an environment. And what anti-racism does is it centers the task of dismantling racism, which is not what EDI does, unless the practitioner who's responsible for EDI has the mindset to do that. And that's not, so unless you have Tyjondah or Nancy. If you don't, it's very possible, right? It's very possible that the focus will go elsewhere. And so, of course, my bias, I'm a human rights lawyer, and my entry point now is human rights law. And the Human Rights Code prohibits discrimination based on race, and it requires us to think about race and other forms of discrimination from an intersectional perspective, which you mentioned, Tyjondah. And it requires us not only to identify where discrimination or related forms of discrimination like harassment, for example, might be taking place, but it actually binds organizations to take proactive steps to stop the discrimination and to stop the systems that allow the discrimination and inequities to exist. Equity, diversity, and inclusion, for the most part, doesn't have that requirement to end the oppression that creates the feelings of lack of belonging or lack of involvement or lack of visibility, whereas equity arguably does, but human rights does, and so does anti-racism. So for me, when someone asks, how do we deal with the issue of racism in our blank school, community, church, workplace, my answer is, well, make sure you're using the right terms, right? Out of EDI, the best term, in my view, is equity, because equity has a structural element to it, and it requires us to think about how people are being structurally disadvantaged, how our systems are oriented to benefit those who occupy certain spaces in race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and so on. So as a reflective thought, because I know we're going to get into our kind of back and forth, and Nancy is giving me the look, which means let's move on to more of the discussion. I think if you're working in an organization or as a volunteer or an employee, or you want to start an organization and you want to make sure that it has an equitable space, make sure that you're using the right framework that will help you look at the structural impact of an expression of racism, so that you can identify the strategies that need to be used to dismantle it. And then once you do that, we can have conversations about safe space and things like that. But I think that dismantling racism is a first step.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Njeri and Tyjondah. You know, we could have this conversation for the rest of our lives. And as my mother told me, even when I'm dead, the conversation continues. So, you know, we're just around to wrap up. We're not going to get time to go into deeper conversations. I think that will be part 2. But I'm leaving with 3 things, and I want to share that with you all. And I'm sure you're leaving with other things. But first and foremost, I'm going to lean in on Njeri's piece, and she speaks about EDI, and quite often what is missing is an anti-racism approach. And so EDI and anti-racism, any change work is not about comfort. If you're feeling comfortable after a training, you haven't done a good job, and nobody has really said anything meaningful to you. So what I heard Njeri says, and I'm going to quickly just repeat this, and that is, in order to appropriately address racism, the term racism needs to be defined, and it needs to be said. We need to link it to colonization. We need to link it to white supremacy. I know those words will shake you, but there's no way out. The next area that I'm hearing her speak to is the various that we must address racism in all its entirety. So there's a system, and that system includes societal and structural, institutional, and individual. If we focus strictly on individual, we're not going to get the change. Yes, empathy is really important, but that's not going to be the driving force to get change. And finally, the goal, there's only one goal. At the end of the day, we want this stuff to stop. We must undo and eradicate racism. And on that note, I want to give deep gratitude and thanks to 100 ABC women. I want to thank you, Tyjondah and Njeri. This has been a wonderful and quick session. We look forward to the next round, series 2. Have a wonderful day, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never